I'm not Catholic, but I ran across this article that I found interesting concerning black saints. The article was written by Father Brian Massingale, and I would like to share some of it with you. It's entitled, God Made Black Saints, the Church Whitewashed Them. He writes, back in February 21, 2023. Last November, I delivered the annual Mother Mary Lang Lecture in Black Catholic Studies at Villanova University. Before my presentation, the university unveiled a painting of St. Augustine of Hippo, the patron saint of the university's sponsors. The university commissioned a young black artist, Vernon Adams, to create a work of art that depicts the saint as the North African man that he was. It was stunningly beautiful. During the unveiling ceremony, speakers remarked that while there are many images of Augustine on the campus, this was the first time that shows him as a non-European. The painting not only corrects the historically inaccurate portrayal of the saint, but it also witnesses the true universality of the Catholic faith. Our heritage includes Africans who are both scholars of faith and models of holiness. Sadly, this event shows how so much of our Catholic history and faith have been literally whitewashed. Black people have lived lives worthy of emulation. They are among the exemplars of what it means to follow Jesus. Yet most Catholics are unaware that African descended people have been models of holiness. Perhaps this is why these figures are so poorly known by the nation's Catholics, because an honest look at their lives reveals terrible truths that many, especially white people, would rather not face. And perhaps because they would force us to realize that many of the dynamics and obstacles they had to face have not yet been overcome. Honestly, acknowledging that black people can be holy exposes the lie that white racism needs in order to keep unjust racial privilege in place. The last paragraph reads, by acknowledging St. Augustine's African origins and likely appearance, Villanova did more than correct the historical record. The painting represents a small step towards recognizing what the Second Vatican Council called, quote, the universal call to holiness. This painting becomes a proclamation of the gospel, the good news that Christ identifies himself with, quote, the least among us. Black lives not only matter, they are holy, they are worthy of imitation and acclaim, and they deserve respect and protection. It is time for the rest of the church to catch up to what God is doing and has already done.
It is both surprising and embarrassing that there are no African American saints from the United States recognized by the Catholic Church. We rarely saw a black priest as a kid coming up, and we had a congregation that didn't have any white people in it, but the priests were all white. All the saints that are depicted are all white. It was very striking to me, and so with three friends, we decided that we would come in one day and paint Jesus black. And the statues remained up, and we've been saying for years now that we want to be represented in the church that we've been baptized in. African Americans have been Catholics since the early days of enslavement and have remained through the church through segregation, through mass incarceration and mass poverty, and yet none of us have ever been recognized.
The simple reason why there aren't any black Catholic saints today is that they've only been proposed very recently. A person becomes a saint usually over decades and sometimes even centuries.
I remember my mother told me that one of her favorite places to visit in New York was the Bronx Zoo. She loved the primate's house. She said there was a sign that read, the most dangerous animal in the world. And as you got closer, it was a mirror. And staring back at you was your reflection. But what if an actual person was held in a monkey house for days as part of an ethnological exposition, and it took the zoo 114 years to apologize for such an act? The story of OF-OTA BENGA. The theory of different races started floating about in the 16th century, and race as a construct, especially a hierarchy of racial categories of lesser and greater, started to take root. The continent of Africa has been a particular favorite of scientists, quote-unquote, trying to prove their theories of the African as being between two spectrums of exotic and/or inferior, subhuman, and dangerous. But the curiosity of indigenous races has its roots as long as colonialism, as Christopher Columbus even brought back indigenous Americans with him to Spain in 1493. Oda's story begins with the man that brought him to America, Samuel Phillips Verner, a former missionary who was commissioned by the St. Louis World Fair to bring back pygmies for one of their ethnological fairs. Verner, considered an expert on pygmies at the time, as he spent several years living and studying in the Congo. It is reported that Oda was the sole survivor of his tribe, the Mbutu. His wife and kids were killed along with others in his village in a raid in 1903, and Verner purchased him from African slave traders. From St. Louis, Oda traveled to New Orleans, but it was in New York that his journey took a turn. In 1906, Verner brought him to the Bronx Zoo. It is reported that his entire stay there was for 3 weeks, and initially he was helping the groundskeepers, until it was decided that he would be placed in the orangutan's cage, where he was encouraged to interact and act, quote-unquote, natural, shooting a bow and arrow and such. If mud was thrown at Oda in St. Louis, imagine what awaited for him in New York. The attention that Oda was given did not sit well with him, as once again, onlookers teased him. Oda needed protection on the few occasions he was allowed to leave his cage. He was the most popular exhibit at the zoo. Oda caught the attention of Madison Grant, a eugenicist and advocate of scientific racism, known for his theory of Nordicism. He would soon have the Bronx Zoo display a sign that read, "The African Pygmy, Oda Benga, age 23, height 4'11", weight 103 pounds. Brought from the Kasai River, Congo Free State, South Central Africa by Dr. Samuel P. Verner. Exhibited each afternoon during September." For a brief moment in his short life, no pun intended, one would like to believe that he would find happiness. After a brief stay in an orphanage, Gordon arranged for Oda's relocation to Lynchburg, Virginia, where he was employed at a local tobacco factory, while attending the Virginia Theological Seminary College. Advocates for Oda thought formal education and conversion to Christianity would prove that Africans were not of inferior intelligence. He used his height and agility at the tobacco factory to good use, as he could climb the poles to retrieve the tobacco leaves. He was popular with the co-workers, as it gave him the nickname Bingo. Longing for home, he tried to arrange passage back to the Congo, but the cost was expensive. He grew depressed, and on March 20th, 1916, Oda died of a self-inflicted gunshot to his chest. In 2020, a formal apology by the Wildlife Conservation Society for his exhibition in the Bronx Zoo was issued. His life has inspired countless thought and analyzation of scientific racism, exploitation of Africans in third world countries and cultures, and human zoos. But my mind always goes back to the sign my mom found fascinating outside, the primate house, the most dangerous animal in the world. It certainly was not Oda. He was a victim of his circumstances. He just held up the mirror for all of us to see, so we can ask ourselves if we like what is being reflected back to us. Let me conclude this project of love, reflection, education, and hope by stating this. I intentionally set out to research just a few of the names that helped birth this country into what it is today, starting with some of the patriots. Black people as a whole did not mythicize the narrative of this country, for if we did, we certainly would not contend that Europeans discovered, cultivated, and fought for the Republic to establish the democracy all by themselves. Black people were there as well. Black people were there from the beginning, and time does not account for the numerous names excluded from the books. The ancestors of old contributed more to this nation and society than history will ever dare to give them credit for. Black history is American history, and we continue to make history every day. People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them, quoted James Baldwin. The fight for equal representation in the telling of this nation continues, especially in education. The powers that be do not want you to know who you are, where you came from, and where you have the potential to go. That's why they distract you with entertainment while programming you, trying to influence you on who you ought to be. Over time, there have been several ideations of the concept know thyself. The best saying I found is contributed to Akhenaten. Know thyself as the pride of his creation, the link uniting divinity and matter. Behold a part of God himself within you. Remember your own dignity, nor dare descend to evil or meanness. One of the reasons I love learning history is that it tells a story of mankind and how we have related to each other over the span of time. Culturally, linguistically, religiously. And yes, we war with each other and bicker, and yes, we are selfish and greedy. But the hope is to learn from the past so we don't make the same mistakes over and over and over again. To know yourself, you must know your history. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Conversation Piece Podcast. I am your humble host, Akila, requesting that you join me again. So, until then, be safe, love, and value yourself so that you can love and value others. I bid you adieu with the greeting, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.